Please see us if you're interested in being part of this committee. And with that, I will introduce Xiomara Rodriguez. Xiomara will be our moderator today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leonie, and thank you everyone for coming today. I am really excited just to celebrate women in our community, and thank you for coming to watch this panel. I just want to recognize today that we're here on colonized land, which has been stewarded for centuries before colonization by many indigenous groups such as the Kickapoo and the Peoria nations. And I want to share that context because as the Women's Committee of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, the identities that we hold have always put us in conflict with the many violent systems of colonialism. And part of the goal of this panel is to contextualize International Women's Day in a way that makes sense for our people. Oftentimes, feminism and women's liberation is promoted in a very white, straight, binary, capitalistic, and generally exclusive way. So today we want to address the biases that show up in the women's liberation movement and talk about real ways we can affirm unity and, more importantly, solidarity between women. And I'm so honored to moderate this panel because today we have the honor to hear from three incredible Boricua women who have been doing the grassroots community organizing we need to make our world a more livable place for all beings. So before we jump into this panel, I wanted to take some time for our panelists just to introduce themselves, their names, a little bit of the work that they do, and yeah, just tell us about who you are a little bit.
Thank you, Xiomara. Can we have a round of applause for Xiomara? My name is Jayla Badia. I use she, her pronouns. I am one of the testers as well as a social media specialist at Trans Chicago. A little bit about what I do. I started a trans-led trans and POC market at Trans Chicago. Pretty soon we're gonna hit our third installment. And a little bit about myself. I started off doing youth organizing when I was 17 in high school. Although I'm born here in Chicago, I grew up in Puerto Rico. My family is based in Guamo. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to the PRCC committee for inviting me. I'm very blessed and grateful to be here with you all today. My name is Angela Thompson, or Angela. I use she, her pronouns. I am the co-founder of a collective called Sex Dictation Chicago. And what we do is we do sexual health, sex education for Black and Brown students throughout Chicago. And emerging adults, young adults, we cover all those bases, and we're a collective of FEM sexual health educators. So I recently heard of Trans Chicago, so love that connection. In addition to that, I am a salsera. I've been dancing my whole life. I also act and model, and so I'm a creative. But I'm really all about Chicago, about my Afro-Latina identity. Some of you may know my mother who passed away, Dr. Bishop. It's an honor to be in this space where she would be.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Marisol Morales. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you to the PRCC and my fellow panelists. I use she, her pronouns. I'm old school PRCC, I guess. I started working in this community back in the late 90s. We're on the campaign to free up Puerto Rican political prisoners at Luis Campos High School. Was part of the Villegas movement.
helped run the Family Learning Center, and then moved into higher education. And so currently I'm the executive director for the Carnegie classifications. It's really complex to explain, but basically what I do is people-centered systems change in higher education. And what I'm concerned about is holding our institutions of higher ed across the country accountable to the mission and values that they have, particularly around their efforts to connect with local communities. My roots are in this neighborhood. I was born on Haddon, lived here until I was 2, moved to West Rogers Park, went to DePaul and came back. And I spent many years here, moved to California, came back. All that to say that this space has been the seeds for my leadership, my activism, and the work that I do nationally and internationally around higher education transformation. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. I really appreciate sharing these stories because, you know, a lot of times, especially on days like this, we hear from like, you know, CEOs or like, you know, these women who we don't see around us all the time. And that's nothing against them, but, you know, these are the women I grew up with Angela's mom. Like, I grew up seeing women doing community organizing all the time. And so that's why I wanted to, like, touch on these stories, because this is the everyday work that, you know, we get into. So I just want to thank you all for sharing those stories. And so we're going to get into the questions. So the first question that I have is, what inspires you to do the work that you have been doing? And what advice would you give to young girls who are interested in community organizing?
My mother inspires me, my grandmother inspires me. I really think of all the women that came before me and continue to surround me, that I think my mother really, not constructed, but she was around dope people and she was dope too. And it's funny because my mother was a doctor and she wanted me to be a doctor, but I was never interested in any of that. But to see how she was able to be in like higher education or in those health spaces at like Northwestern, but she would always bring her students to Humboldt Park, do tours. They were at Campos regularly. That was, I always admired how she was able to still stay true to her roots. And I think seeing that, although I'm not a doctor, I am following those steps in my own way. And working with young people also very much inspires me. And so teaching them about things related to sexual health, but also learning from them and hearing their stories and experiences, I think is something that not everyone sees in young people, but there's so much knowledge and inspiration also in them. What was the second part of the question?
The second part was, what advice would you give to young girls who want to be community organizing?
Advice, I would say, like, figure out what you're interested in, you know? Like, if, for me, a long time and still is dancing, but even in the different pockets that I've been in, there's always a way to talk about the issues that are going on in the world, in your community, whatever. And you'll find that there are people who are also interested or also dealing with similar things that want to do something about it, and do what you want about it. And you'll find that there's other spaces and people already doing the work that may have more organized strategies or policies and other things in place. But just doing the work and finding that tribe, I think, is really important, and you'll continue to find that as you figure it out.
I would say what has inspired me really was learning deeply about like Puerto Rican history and culture and thinking about the ways that my education up until I got to college did not include that. And so for me, really the inspiration for my own community organizing work was a course that I took taught by Jose Feliz at the Paul called U.S. Colonialism in Puerto Rico that got us involved in the community. And that sparked in me a way to sort of direct the anger that I felt around injustice, but I didn't know the outlets for it. And so once I got connected to Humboldt Park, the PRCC, and the community organizing work that was happening, it was really a way for me to direct my talents and energy towards that. And I feel like what I was given in this space, especially as a young college student, was the ability to lead, right? To not have obstacles or say you're too young, but like, you know, taking the opportunities, particularly because it was around the time of the campaign to release political prisoners and, you know, speaking in front of large groups, traveling around this issue, getting connected to it. And so that was like my inspiration, and this community continues to be an inspiration for me. So there are spaces that I go to that I don't talk about the work that's been done here, you know, through the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, the Puerto Rican Agenda, the ways that we have resisted that continues to inspire me in the resistance work that I do in the higher ed landscape. And I think my advice to young women who want to do organizing is, you know, to really learn those skills, because it doesn't matter what space you're in, you can always utilize organizing skills. It could be in a corporate setting, it could be in a healthcare setting, it could be in a neighborhood setting, but those are all skills that are connected to relationship and caring about what people care about and helping them think about how to move change that, you know, can really be utilized in every setting. And I think the other piece is, to have fun while you're doing it. Like, it's not all work, right? And so the ability to create happiness in these spaces, celebrate those moments, find time to dance, find time to express joy, like that is also resistance because our capitalist system wants us to just be workers and not human beings who enjoy life. And so the ability to find that joy in creative spaces is really important.
So I'll start off by saying that definitely my experience is very different because I'm a transgender woman. I would say that, like, first and foremost, my inspiration has always been making sure that I am creating the space that my younger self would have desperately needed at the time. And also realizing that there are many, not just trans women, but trans men, trans feminine people, trans masculine people, people who are non-binary and like are still figuring out the terms of their gender identity. Like, they need space. And based on my experience, I have never always been welcome in cisgender women's spaces, and which I do understand why. But my advice always to younger trans women, trans femmes, all queer people who want to do organizing is always to take up space. Like, you take up space, and if you don't take up space, you make up your own space, and it doesn't matter what everyone else thinks. As long as you're there and you're speaking your truth, that's truly what matters. And then lastly, I will say my other inspiration is always gonna be my youth organizing, because although I didn't get to start fully living my truth until 2 years ago, I've always been surrounded by a strong community of young queer people, young people who are trans. And within my youth organizing days, like, definitely seeing how happy and how we accomplish so much when we're together truly inspires me and truly keeps me going to continue creating my own space, and also to join more spaces, because I'm really glad that I'm able to speak on a panel like this today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those beautiful stories and just like all of the advice. I'm learning myself, so I really appreciate it. And then my next question is, what does celebrating women mean to you, and why is it important?
I think it's definitely important to celebrate women's history. Specifically, I think of people trans women who paved the way, who like, we think of like, obviously we think of Marsha P. Johnson, we think of Sylvia Rivera, and like remembering that we definitely live currently in an age where there is an idea of how a trans woman is supposed to look like. There is an idea of how trans people are supposed to look like, but remembering that the trans women who were the ones like shaking the table, that were the ones that were like leading the community, that were doing the work, were women that look just like me. And I believe that it's very important to honor that. It's very important to honor how like older trans women, how like again like how they look like, and definitely remembering that like they like there's this term, a little bit of education. There's this term where like some people like refer to trans women who don't look feminine as bricks, and reality is that like the trans women who were like shaking the table and were doing the work were bricks as well. And we were again like the first brick that was thrown at Stonewall was by a trans woman. So I just say brick empowerment for all of my girls, for real.
At first I thought that was a tricky question, and I realized it's because I choose to celebrate my womanhood every day, and I think that for me is an act of resistance because I'm a Black Puerto Rican woman, and there are a lot of things in this world, in this life that will try to knock you down. So, and it's in just like very simple things, and it's just like loving myself. And to even further that, I think it's extending that love that I have for myself, for other women, for trans women, and making sure that although I might have my obstacles and my things, like to also be a voice for people who aren't always in space. I think that's how I would say I celebrate women today.
There's a couple of different ways of thinking about answering this, but I think that there are so many untold stories. Our, heroes don't always make books. We don't always know the struggles that they experience. And like in this moment, I'm thinking a lot about my mom, who passed away in July. And in some ways, the way that women are set up to be at odds with one another and how we continue to manifest that, and the power that it takes to really push against that. Mothers and daughters are set up to many ways to be at odds with one another. And that it's the understanding, the listening, the compassion of those stories that are not the ones in books, but the ones that you hear around the kitchen table or that happen. I'm remembering when I was pregnant and my grandmother started telling me all of these stories that like I wasn't privy to because I hadn't had a baby, but now that I was gonna have a baby, like there was this whole set of stories that I was privy to. Or, as she got older, stories about my grandfather, lots of good ways, right? All of these different stories that I think are really important to us understanding who we are so that we can actually celebrate those things and understand that it's not just generational trauma that's passed on, but it's also generational strength. Mm-hmm. And so, and I think about the celebration of women because I have a son. And so what kind of man am I raising him to be? one that continues to replicate patriarchy or one that understands the importance of celebrating women and respect for women, all kinds of women, right? And I think lastly, it is about the conscious choice in the relationships that I have with other women. So you can either continue to participate in this system that puts us at odds and competition, or I can be in spaces that really celebrate our success. And I was talking to my therapist a couple of weeks ago, and she said that there's a lot of research, but women's friendships are oftentimes based around sort of connecting around misery, like when something's going wrong in your life, that's when your girls are there, but not around success. And men's relationships are oftentimes based around success and celebrating those things. And so thinking about how do we challenge that I can be with you when things are bad and when things are good. That your success means I'm happy for you and I'm not like, what about me? I am invested in that success. And so celebrating women means, I think, challenging the spaces that we're in and honoring ourselves by telling those stories and passing those stories down. So that eventually maybe they're part of books, maybe they're part of podcasts, but they're part of our like generational memory and our generational strength.
I love that. I feel like that's so powerful, and like just everybody sharing like a little bit about like really just thinking about what celebrating women is about like where we've come and how we've gotten here. And I think for me, like even I've had issues with my own womanhood because I felt like I still struggle with how do you like define womanhood besides like in contrast to the violence that men cause. And like that's why I wanted to ask that question, because it's like I feel like censoring womanhood in every way and femininity, whatever that is, whatever that means to you, is an act of like de-censoring men. And that's why I wanted to get to like how do we talk about like how we come together without it having to censor men or like misery or violence towards them, where it could censor us celebrating our wins and the history and the amazing people who've come before us. So I appreciate you all sharing that. And that goes into my next question, which is, how do you think we can promote more solidarity between women and address our biases, the ways that some women are excluded from feminism, particularly white feminism? So yeah, those.
Definitely include trans women in your feminism. Definitely make sure that you're doing your research and make sure that like you're looking up, what are terms, what are questions that we shouldn't be using when it comes to creating welcoming spaces for all women. And definitely like, I mean, personally, as someone who like, I'm all about inclusivity, there's a term that's definitely used a lot, which is women, and then the X is in the middle. And it's really important to actually like do research and understand that not every term that is meant to be inclusive isn't actually doing the work that you think it is doing. And I'll just go ahead and say that like, as long as like you're creating welcoming spaces for us, as long as you're actually like talking to us, like even if it's just saying hi, how are we doing? And finding out like how are ways that we can work together. I truly believe that's how like you can start creating unity, and including trans women in your feminism, including trans women like in the work. Yeah, just do your research.
I agree with everything you just said, so I don't want to repeat it. But I would say in addition to that, at least in my workspace with sexual health education, is talking about these divisions and tension that a lot of young people, especially women and girls, are kind of taught, whether they're seeing it in their relationships with their mothers or their mom's friends, or just in older relationships, you kind of see it, and then it kind of becomes your relationship with your friend, your frenemy, or whatever. And so beyond talking about just sex, sexual health is very much talking about understanding yourself, understanding your boundaries, your different types of relationships, not just romantic or sexual ones. And really getting to like, why are you mad at that person? Like, what did they do? Or what did you do? What did you say? And the approach that Sexpectations takes is to be very participatory and having discussions, not just lecturing, like, these are the facts, go do this, because that's not how it works. It's more so having a discussion and talking about the nuances of the different relationships we may have, the different experiences we may have. So I think that's the way that I like to come to that work, in that way, in that space. But it's also a journey that I think we're also all trying to figure out. Like, there's certain things that will trigger me that other people do, not just other women, but just people in general, that I have to check myself, like, oh, am I jealous right now? What am I jealous about? Am I projecting something on that person? Are they everything I want to be and I just can't be right now because of my own obstacles or things that I got going on? So checking myself and then trying to do my best in the spaces to be a model, but also hold space for hold discussions around those things.
Name of the organization, Expectations, like, yeah. I guess one thing is that I'm really not interested in having conversations about white feminism or always putting the feminism that we are looking to create as a juxtaposed to white feminism, right? We've never been included, we're never gonna be included. We could sort of fight for space in their spaces, or we can create our space. I think what I'm more interested in having conversations around is the ways, and for me as identifying as Afro-Puerto Rican in a space that's deeply segregated and divided, is really having conversations between and amongst Latinx communities, African American communities, within the Latino community, around Afro-Latinas and what that means and how our experiences are different, and then creating a set of guidelines and expectations and conversations that help us see that in ways that we're not always, sort of the inclusion of Afro-Puerto Rican or Afro-Latina women happens as a secondary response after they put all of the white Latinas up, right? And so then really having some of those deep conversations about race that I think that we struggle to have. I also think about the ways in which we reach back to sort of what has allowed us to survive, both in the migration to the Americas and then to the States, is really this kind of collectivity, as a central piece to our survival. So for me, the solidarity, I think, needs to exist within minoritized communities as a way to create the alternative to the system that we're living in, and then begin organizing around those pieces and really centering collectivity as a part of that. And with the expansiveness of what, sort of being a woman is, from trans to cis and everything in between, because if we're not having those nuanced conversations, then can we actually be on a future path towards what feminism, is and can be.
You, and that kind of leads into my last question of the panel. So I wanted to talk about, because, as a panel of Boricua women and all of our identities that we hold, I wanted to touch on the fact that, recently in Puerto Rico, there's been a rise in femicides and murder specifically of Boricua trans women. And the same way that we were talking about the ways that feminism excludes certain people with different identities, this happens in our own Boricua community. And in the movement for women's liberation, Boricua women often face sexism, discrimination, racism, and violence from our own Boricua community. And knowing this reality we face, my question is, what makes you proud to be a Boricua woman? And how can we work together to address the violence in all its forms that Boricua women face in our community every day, to make our culture more affirming? Because I think we think about culture as something that's static sometimes. It's like salsa or gandules and like whatever, you know, but like what we don't realize is that we are actively making culture all the time. And so how can we not only just panelists, but everybody here in this room, like think about, you know, that's really terrible to think that in Puerto Rico, there are women and trans women, like all types of women, being murdered and being specifically targeted because of their identities. And so what are we doing to like think about how we can make our culture and our community more life affirming?
So yeah, thank you for bringing that up because I think a lot of times when it comes to the loss of a trans sister every year, it's definitely it's always with heavy hearts to even talk about it. Let's remember that although I definitely we're all Boricuas and we should be thinking about like everything going on in Puerto Rico, but also remember that like in the United States, like in the past year, like the number has increased of transgender women who have been killed. We are now at a record high of over 60 trans women who have been killed in the past year. And remembering that the trans women who are being killed are Black trans women. Remembering that and that goes into also saying that as Boricuas, we need to remember about our Afro-Latino, and even if not Afro-Latino, our Black siblings, our like people that are honestly being left behind or out of the conversation, remembering that like we need to be prioritizing Black voices, we need to start including Black trans women into our work as well, remembering that Black trans women are in danger, remembering that Black femme people are in danger, and definitely remembering that we could, as a proud Boricua, and like I always think about my family, but also always remembering that like we are in Chicago, we are in the city, we're in the US, and there is a lot of injustices, there's a lot of killings, and we are being targeted. And let's just remember that like we should definitely always be prioritizing Black trans women, Black femme people. And other than that, I would say, yeah, like please just make sure that like you're doing your research, because this is something that like not everyone either cares or knows about. And like when it comes to like us because a lot of times we will be the ones creating our own spaces. We have our space over in Trans Chicago. It is a welcoming space for Black and brown trans people. We are just remember that like as we're creating our own spaces, like you're also included to come in, even if you're not trans, even if you're not queer. Like if you just want to learn, like come in to learn, like feel free to ask us questions. And yeah, other than that, Black trans lives matter, Black femme lives matter, and Black lives matter.
It's fun. I keep following them after, and I'm like, I think what I would say is I'm a very proud Boricua, very proud Black woman. I love the island of Puerto Rico. I love Chicago. I love Humboldt Park. But I feel like my heart is broken again and again when I see people in my family, friends. I went to Jose de Diego, so friends that I may still be Facebook friends with. A lot of them I had to unfriend. But when I hear very disgusting comments about whether it be Black people, trans people, queer people, something that's other than them, and a lot of them are Boricuas from the area. And like I said, very, very heartbreaking. So, and then I try to figure out, like, is this a moment for me to educate? Not over Facebook, I hope, don't do that, that's a waste of time. But like when we're sitting together in the sala, like, I saw what you posted, am I ready to have that conversation? Sometimes I am. I'm a Sagittarius, I am not afraid of confrontation, I'm ready to have a conversation. But sometimes with those people that do mean a lot to us, you know, especially within your family, that is scary, can cause, depending on, you know, the conversation or what it is that you want to share, it could be dangerous to have those conversations, but I think it really starts with having difficult conversations and not finding a safe space and comfort zone or something, or even finding small ways to approach it little by little. Because I think people know it and feel it, but are very quiet, and they say that, you know, you're part of it if you're silent. So to do your best, to do your research. Unfortunately, I could even say, like, I don't see that. I've heard of it, of the femicide, but I don't see it on a regular basis, so I don't know a lot about it. I want to do more research to start having more conversations about it, to figure out what I can do from Chicago. But I think it really starts with having those difficult conversations. And if you need to unfriend those people or set those boundaries, you do what you gotta do.
I think, you know, it's so much for me is rooted in systems of violence that continue to sort of get perpetuated generation after generation. And also the ways that overlaps with mental health. And, you know, so what makes someone think that they've got the right to put hands on you, right? And where does that lack of control, you know, come from? Or that looking at someone and because they're different than you, because they hold a different identity, thinking that you have a right to take their life, right? And so for me, a lot of it's the conversations about that. It's also like really looking critically at our society. We are inundated with images of violence. Like that we become numb.
Yeah.
And that we think, right, that's the only way to gain respect, right? Well, you disrespected me, and so because you disrespected me, I can do this, right? And not thinking about, like, why are you feeling that way, right? What kind of tools can we give our young people? What kind of tools can we give parents to begin to break those cycles of violence and really just be able to pause? You know, I got a temper, right? 0 to 60 really quick. But I've had to learn, okay, I cannot do that, right? Or with my son, like, about how it's not always, you know, the right way to go. He's 17 now, so I can't do that. But the point is breaking those things, right? And so many times, you know, thinking about being told, oh, I'll give you something to cry about. Right, the ways that we, the adultism that shows up in families, the sexism. And, you know, as women, we continue to also foster, perpetuate patriarchy, right? We are raising these boys who are doing this. And so we support, I mean, who voted Trump in way, right? Like, we support these things, and so those opportunities to really think differently. I was reading Bell Hooks recently, I'll finish it with this, but she was talking about sort of the beginnings of the feminist movement and these like feminist liberation circles and these conversations, right? And so maybe even thinking about recreating those kinds of spaces so we can actually have these discussions and break some of these down and invite, you know, our male friends and partners and fathers, right, to these conversations about challenging these stereotypes and notions and breaking those cycles that make people think, that make us think like we have a right to do this, like what we're seeing happening currently in Ukraine, right? They think they got a right to take that space from people. The US thinks they have a right to be in Puerto Rico, right? And so beginning to break those pieces as individuals so that we can break them in systems.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate everything everybody had to say. And, I just want to, take it back to all of us because as we're talking about the importance of reflecting, of creating spaces where we all can show up as our true selves, speak our truth, live our truth, and feel safe doing that, and feel supported in solidarity with one another. I think the reason why I wanted to bring up Puerto Rico is because, as the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, I feel like oftentimes we recognize our duty when there was a hurricane to respond to a hurricane. When there's a need, we respond to that. And it's also our duty to change our culture. And we see that there's a rise in femicides. We see that there's a rise in murders of trans women, Black trans women. That's also our duty to respond to that. And so I hope that we can come away from this and think about how we can continue these conversations and have these hard conversations with our families in Puerto Rico. Maybe they don't know about it, let them know, and just continue to move our culture forward. So I really appreciate you all sharing your voices, speaking your truth, and everybody for listening.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you, Jayla. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Marisol. And thank you, Xiomara. In this part of the event, we're going to have some of our committee members introduce some of our awardees. Yes. Okay, so the first one is Xiomara. Actually, you're the first one.
I thought I was gonna. All right, so the first honoree for today's award ceremony is for the honor of advocacy, and we would like to honor Melissa Mark Viverito. He is the Chief Policy Officer of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. Over the years, the PRCC has worked closely with Melissa on a myriad of issues, key among them organizing to free our Puerto Rican political prisoners and mobilizing to get the U.S. Navy out of Vieques. Melissa is the former Speaker of the New York City Council, the coordinator of the movement Todo Nueva York con Vieques, and was the president of Mujeres del Barrio. Most recently, Melissa Mark Viverito has been essential to the success and continued promotion of the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act, H.R. 2070, which is fighting for a decolonization process for Puerto Rico. Thank you, Melissa, for all your advocacy. And then the next person the next award is our community award, and Dr. Melissa Lewis will be announcing that.
Yes, another Melissa. I have the honor of awarding the community award, and this person is a longtime community activist. She is joining us virtually, but I do want to congratulate Juanita Garcia for the community award.
Awesome. I have the distinct privilege of awarding 4 dope women back to back. And so I am going to do that. The first, I feel real short behind here. Like this was not built for people like me. The first honoree is in the realm of education. Dr. Isara Polido is currently an associate professor at Northeastern Illinois University, Educational Inquiry Curriculum Studies in the College of Education. And I could read Dr. Polido's bio, but I don't think that does her justice, right? I want to tell you a small story of when I first encountered Dr. Polido. I was a grad student at Northeastern Illinois University. I was getting my master's in Community and Educational Studies, a program that does education, a world of greatness. I was taking a critical race theory course with Dr. Polido. And I thought I knew everything I needed to know about activism, right? And about addressing racism in community. And I had not encountered a professor quite like Dr. Isara Polido, one who really talked about theory, right? And a lot of professors will do that, but they'll talk about theories, but they do very little of what that looks like in praxis. What does it mean to take knowledge and education and do the work for real change, right? And it was in that moment, and I was already an activist trying to free political prisoners and a real hardcore independentista. And it was the first time my entire activism world made sense to me, right? And that was through your class. But Dr. Isara Polido is also one that holds an entire university accountable, right? For what it's meant to do. Northeastern Illinois University is a Hispanic serving institution. Isara won't let that university live until it meets the mission of being a Hispanic serving institution. And so I can't think of a better honoree to honor in the realm of education as you continue to challenge institutions and challenge your barriers to ensure that young Boricuas like me can get an education that's worthy of community change. And so help me give a round of applause. And if our honorees would like to say anything, you're more than welcome to if you would. Yes. All right, so the next honoree is one of the best businesswomen I know in our neighborhood, and she has joined us virtually along with Juanita Garcia. Michelle Gomez. How many of you guys, by raise of hand, have been to Sangria Fest? Sangria Fest is one of the dopest festivals in the neighborhood, and she puts it together, but more importantly, she's a business owner of Dynamic Salon and Spa. She has owned that business for almost 20 years. I cannot tell you how hard as a Latina woman it is to own a business, but own a business on Division Street when we are being attacked rapidly by gentrification, and she has done everything to hold on. She is someone who believes in building community, someone who believes in building womanhood, and she has most recently become the executive director of Fiesta Patronales, the Puerto Rican festival in the park. And so we're super excited to see what Michelle has done and want to support her in her business endeavors. And so, Michelle, I know you're watching. We have your certificate and your rose when you can come by. The next honoree, who has also joined us virtually because she is caught up in legislation unless she's been able to make it in person. The legislation award goes to Rosana Rodriguez. Rosana Rodriguez, yes, if you guys live in the 33rd ward or close to it, you know that she has been rocking and rolling for working families and immigrant families in the 33rd ward. She was born and raised in Puerto Rico, came to Chicago, was a former art teacher at Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos High School before running for the 33rd aldermanic position. And she has done some real progressive things in city council. The first being able to take on police accountability in her ward. She's working on a legislation called treatment, not trauma, right? And that legislation is really working on how do we build a structure that addresses the needs of community members when they're in crisis, rather than call the police on them and further traumatize them in those settings. And so, Rosana, when you are available, you're welcome to pick up your rose and your certificate. You have been one of the baddest legislators I have met in my activism. All right. The last awardee I will be presenting today is one of my coordinators in my department. Her name is Shanice Santiago. Most of you know her. Born and raised in the neighborhood. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in Latin American Studies and Justice Studies from Northeastern Illinois University. And she has been doing youth work for about a decade now, really in the educational space first, before I rocked her from a school setting into the very good comes community organizing work. And Shanice today is being awarded for the Personal Growth Award. Shanice coordinates one of the most successful violent prevention programs in the city, right? We are rated top 3 in terms of doing violence prevention in the DFSS department. And she has been doing all of that while caring for her father who has stage 4 cancer. And so she has worked more than 40 hours a week while taking him to chemo 2 days a week and being a mother to 2 children. And so I couldn't think of anyone more fitting for this award than Shanice Santiago.
All right.
All right. Let's see you come back up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I am awarding 2 of my students. They're not able to be with us here in person, but I will make sure that we celebrate them tomorrow at Unity. I am celebrating 2 students that have a tremendous amount of resilience and perseverance. One is an immigrant from Guatemala who came in the migration, the caravan of young people that came alone. And she traveled to the US by herself. It took her and a few of her cousins 6 months to arrive here so alive. And the amount of strength that it takes to do that, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. And she comes to school every day with a heart of gold that she's going to really appreciate this award. The second, her name is Evelyn Cordon. And Amaris is another student that does not shy away from her mistakes, from what she's been through. She will tell you and she will lay it out plain. I have done this. It took me this to get here today, and I'm here and I'm gonna fight for it because this is what I want. I want an education and I need someone to believe in me. I need someone who's gonna fight for me. I need someone who's gonna be my champion. And we at the school and the PRCC are her champions. And Amani deserves this award. She deserves to know that we believe in her, and as a community, we support her. And we will celebrate the people at Unity tomorrow. And I think it's just fitting that their peers really celebrate them versus the adults around them. So thank you.
All right, and then our last award is the Stevia Rivera Award, and this award was nominated for giving it to Jayla, and Jayla was nominated by Natalie Tirado, who couldn't be here today, but she sent a message for me to read on behalf of her, and she says, when listing the names of those who in the 1960s fought in the US for civil rights, very, very few named Stevia Rivera, a Puerto Rican fighter for the rights of gay and transgender people. There's a recollection where Stevia talks about many things, but she accentuated something that ripped the very foundation of human rights. If you did not have 3 pieces of male attire on you, you were going to jail. This was real, and in many places, this type of human right violation continues to happen. When the Women's Committee was reestablished, I added the component of Stevia Rivera nomination. Today, it is a privilege to see a young woman who wears on her sleeve parts of Stevia. Stevia used to say, until my community is allowed the respect to march in the front, I will go march with my community, because that's where I'm needed and that's where I belong. It is with great pleasure to present Jayla Padilla the Stevia Rivera Award. Ms. Jayla has been a living proof of being in the front lines, marching, advocating for her sisters and brothers, and sharing her own survival narratives. I had heard of Jayla's work at the end of 2017 when she was still a teenager, but formally met her during the beginning of the pandemic. Jayla came into our doors seeking to be enrolled in an evidence-based intervention specific for transgender women. Shortly after becoming a TWIST graduate and advocate, Jayla asked if there were opportunities to be involved in the Trans Empowerment Center because this is her community. And though empowerment is an individual process, it can also be collective. Prior to joining us, Jayla was an active youth organizer where she worked with voices of youth in Chicago education and led more than 15 workshops to educate topics of gender and sexuality, restorative justice, know your rights, and more. She traveled to Cuba as part of a delegation to learn about radical health and justice, which is how I came to learn about her activism back in 2017. In her 23 years, Jayla has accomplished much for the community as an individual. I have a saying that miracles don't just happen when you wish on them, you must work for them. Her latest work has been creating and leading the Pillars Market, a space for POC vendors and artists of trans experience to showcase their work and create more visibility of the small businesses owned by these communities. If you didn't know, Pillar is a symbol of support, stability, and strength. Jayla, though I am not here today to formally present you this award, it is an honor for my last nomination to have been you. Congratulations. That was the end of our,
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Yancy mentioned a businesswoman by the name of Michelle Gomez. She actually sent out these little gift bags. So I think her hashtag is sending me out. There's limited quantity, so you get lucky if you get one. Also, don't forget that we have food back here. Please help yourself before you leave. And also, as you know, we are at El Mercado del Pueblo, and this has been an initiative of the Puerto Rican Culture Center, and the vendors here are all self-starters. So please make sure that you come back during the days that they're open, and I believe it's the weekend. You can, so you can strengthen other women and other business women by buying their products and be with them here and enjoying what happens here during the weekend, because apparently we have all sorts of stuff happening at El Mercado. We have drag shows, we have International Women's Event, we have all kinds of stuff happening here. And this is just stuff que pasa en el barrio, right? Nice. If any of the awardees or nominees wanting to say something, this is the best time to do so. If anybody want to see any of the women who received a nomination, if does anybody have a question for any of them, this would be the time to do it. Or forever hold your peace. You're not a woman, sit.
And I have a question or comment. Jose was kind enough to nudge me and remind me that the Chicago chapter of the National Conference of Puerto Rican Women is having an event in commemoration of Women's History Month. It's going to be Sunday, March 20th, at Nelly's Restaurant, the second floor. And the theme is Speaking Our Truths. So we have, we're gonna enjoy two speakers. Our very own Cristina Pasiones Sayas, who is our senator now, but we've known her before that, right? And also Representative Delia Ramirez. So the idea, on that, Sunday morning, we'll have breakfast and, we'll hear their perspective on speaking our truth and bringing, get a very nice uplifting reunion. It's our first since the COVID to, just gather and feel that good energy of women who speak, their truth. Thank you. Thank you.
I know there's a lot happening. There's two specific people who are working on some great things. I know Melissa, you're working on the self-determination bill, and Isaura, you're working on the Cielo Residencia for Northeast Illinois University. Are there any updates that you'd like to give the community or any report back or final words before we close out?
Yes.
Buenas tardes a todos. First of all, thank you so much to the committee and for the recognition. As indicated, my name is Melissa Riverito. And before I say a couple of updates about the bill, let me just say, you all here that are living in Chicago, I don't live in Chicago, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, but I have been living in New York City for many, many years now. And I continue every time I come to Chicago to be inspired by the Puerto Rican community here on Division Street particularly. Jose, as for many of you, was a mentor to me as well. I've known him for many years in the struggle. I'm turning 53. I think I've known, and he's been a mentor of mine for maybe 25 to 30 years. Wow. When I was growing up in the activism as well, he's the one that really tutored me and mentored me and educated me a lot around issues of importance to our community, and I've been an organizer ever since. So now it is a real honor to be able to work with the PRCC to continue to advocate on behalf of our community. So as a Boricua Puertorriqueña, particularly we are working around HR 2070, which is a bill that is sponsored by Bonilla Velázquez and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and is the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act. And it really is a historic bill in that it would allow Puerto Rico to go through a process of self-determination, which basically means decolonization for Puerto Rico. That it's not going to be slog, as they say, because this is a conversation that we have not been able to really get traction in Congress, but really allow the people of Puerto Rico to define for themselves, right, what the outcome in the future of the island should be, just to put it very basically. And so we are going to be mobilizing from here in Chicago, from Florida, from Puerto Rico, from other places to be in Washington at the end of April. So PRCC will be deciding and putting together a delegation of folks to go to Congress to meet with legislators, to learn more about this bill so that alternate voices can be heard. Right now, the only voice that seems to be dominating in the halls of Congress are those who favor statehood, because the party in Puerto Rico that represents statehood has access to a lot of money. They are representing the elite in Puerto Rico, and they basically are in the halls of Congress almost every day talking about statehood, and making it seem that that is the overwhelming demand of the people of Puerto Rico, which we know is not true. So our challenge here is to bring voices that represent alternate positions and to hear from the young people and to hear from the elected officials and civil society and the cross-section of everything in Puerto Rico so that we know and Congress members know that is not the overwhelming demand. So I want to thank the PRCC for all the work and commitment that they've done. And it is a real honor and pleasure to work alongside this wonderful organization. I have not been in Chicago for a few years now, but now seeing this Mercado del Pueblo is really inspiring. We have one of the largest Puerto Rican communities in New York, but we have not been able to organize the way that the Chicago community has. And so it really is inspiring to be here. So I thank you for allowing me to give that update, and I look forward to seeing some of you, right, in DC in April, okay? Make sure you make sure.
Awesome, thank you so much, Melissa. Isabel, do you want to provide any? Yeah, maybe. There's a lot of pressure there. So for those of you who may not be familiar with this Seal of Excelencia, it's an award given by Excelencia in Education, a national nonprofit organization that advocates for Latinx post-secondary attainment. And it really is about just how do we demonstrate that we are intentional and effective serving Latino students. And it seems simple enough, but you'd be surprised because it has to be, we have to be able to lay out what's our strategy, what are our practices, and what is the data that supports that these are in fact effective. And it's been a real shift in how we think about serving students at Northeastern, because it's brought to light some gaps that we have in terms of being intentional. And so it's been a great opportunity to have conversations with our senior leadership and to try and close some of those gaps. We're gathering those practices and programs that serve Latino students. We're gathering the data that supports those practices and programs, and we'll be ready to submit the application in June. And I really want to say that we couldn't do this. We couldn't even get to the point of applying for the application without the support of our community-based organizations, without the Puerto Rican agenda, really letting the institution know how important it is for our communities that we have this award and that we're able to outline how we're being effective and intentional. And so I really want to thank you all for that. Awesome. So, I've been saying this the last few meetings, right? For the last several weeks, I have been in spaces where we end early and start on time. I'm like, you want me to come? Yes.
Sorry. Hold on, not a comment. I was like, who is gonna announce the next Pillars event? The Pillars organizer right here. Like, I completely forgot about it. So I would like to also welcome all of you. Pillars has been very successful, in case anyone was wondering. And we are hitting our third Pillars installment, which is gonna be on March 26th. It's on a Saturday, from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. It is an all trans, all POC market. Please come through, like, definitely always support small businesses, support artists. And if you come to a Mercado de Corona and you know Alejandra, she's like right over there. She will also be over there, and she is honestly one of my highlights for every Pillars event. And definitely come through, because on our third installment, we're gonna have a few special performances, specifically by Black and brown trans artists and singers. So definitely come through, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
Where's it at?
Thank you. We're located at 2753 West Division. That's our office for Trans Chicago, and it's at the corner. Well, actually, it's next to the currency exchange by California Division. Thank you.
Awesome. So we're still gonna do this. We're gonna end a half hour early. I do want to tell you all, today is International Women's Day, but we should be celebrating women every day, right? This is not an annual event. We should always be thinking how we try to create systems to elevate women, get women into senior leadership positions, and ensure that we create institutions that eradicate patriarchy, sexism, and transphobia and homophobia. And so I appreciate all of you guys for being here today, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon.